My heart sank when I received the wedding invitation in the mail, addressed to dear friends and family, but with one glaring omission: my name. My son, the boy I had nurtured and loved unconditionally, had chosen to share his special day without me. It felt like a knife twisting in my chest. How could he leave me out of such a monumental moment? But instead of retreating into despair, I decided to confront the truth behind his choice. I had a secret of my own, one that had been buried for far too long, and it was time to reveal it. This is the story of how I uncovered the hidden layers of his life, and how, in doing so, I began to reclaim my own. Before I dive deeper into this journey, let me know in the comments if you've ever felt excluded by someone you love. It helps to know I'm not alone in this. And if you find my story resonates with you, consider subscribing. It gives me the strength to share my truth. Now, let's unravel this tale together. My phone buzzed gently on the kitchen counter, a message notification lighting up the screen. I glanced down, expecting to see a routine greeting from one of my friends or perhaps a text from my daughter. Instead, the sender's name immediately stopped me cold: Mark. My son. The message was brief, almost clinical: a wedding photo with a small caption: "Our special day. Wish you could have been here." I stared at the image, the happy couple, radiant and smiling, surrounded by friends and family. But there was one glaring absence: me. I wasn't in a single picture, not even as a shadow in the background. The realization hit me like a wave crashing against a fragile shore. My son had gotten married. And he hadn't invited me. Not even a hint, a whisper, or a call. Nothing. 1,000 questions flooded my mind, but the most painful was the simple truth: I was excluded. My heart ached, not just from the sting of being left out, but from the silent message it sent, that I was no longer important, that my presence wasn't wanted on one of the most significant days of his life. I sat down heavily at the kitchen table, the phone slipping from my fingers. How long had this been going on? Had he planned this behind my back? I had always imagined standing beside him, watching him take this big step into adulthood, sharing in the joy and excitement. Not this cold, distant void. I thought back to the years I had poured into raising Mark, the sleepless nights when he was sick, the school projects that kept me up late, the soccer games where I cheered until my voice was hoarse. I had been there through his triumphs and his mistakes. I had tried so hard to be the mother he could rely on. And yet, here I was, staring at a message that felt like a betrayal so deep it cut through every memory we had shared. I tried calling him, my fingers trembling as I dialed. The call went straight to voicemail. I left a message, voice cracking, trying to keep my composure. "Mark, it's Mom. I saw the photo. I wish you had told me. I love you." I hung up, hoping for a response, for any sign that this was a misunderstanding. But the silence that followed was deafening. That night, sleep escaped me. I lay awake, turning over every interaction we'd had in recent months, questioning where things had gone wrong. Had I missed signs? Had I said something that hurt him? The thought that I might have caused this rift gnawed at my heart. I remembered the last time we spoke, a brief conversation about his job, nothing out of the ordinary. But now, with the wedding news, it all felt like a carefully constructed facade. The next morning, I found myself scrolling through social media, trying to piece together what I had missed. Pictures from the wedding streamed past, each one a reminder that I was an outsider looking in. Friends I barely knew were tagged, their comments filled with congratulations and love. I saw my ex-husband, smiling beside a woman I didn't recognize. My chest tightened. Was my absence a choice? A statement? Or something else I couldn't yet understand? I reached out to my sister, hoping for some comfort. Her voice was gentle, but her words didn't hide the truth. "I'm so sorry, honey. I can't imagine how hard this must be. But maybe there's a reason he felt this way. Maybe there's something he's struggling with that you don't know about." Her suggestion planted a seed of doubt and worry. Was there an unresolved issue between us that I had overlooked or ignored? As the days passed, I found myself oscillating between anger and sadness. I wanted to scream at him for shutting me out, for making me feel invisible. Yet, beneath the anger was a profound sorrow, a mourning for the relationship that seemed to be slipping through my fingers like sand. I was his mother, and yet, I felt like a stranger in his life. I tried to reach out again, sending a heartfelt email, expressing my love and my desire to understand. I told him I missed him and that I hoped we could talk. But the messages went unanswered. Each silence was a wound, widening the chasm between us. One afternoon, as I sat in the quiet of my living room, I realized I needed to face this head-on. I couldn't keep waiting for him to come to me. I had to gather the courage to confront the reality of our fractured relationship. I had to find out why he had shut me out of his wedding, why he had chosen to exclude me from such a monumental moment. But beneath the fear and uncertainty, a small spark of determination flickered. I wasn't ready to give up on my son or on the bond we had once shared. I knew that somewhere beneath the hurt and confusion, there was a reason, something that needed to be uncovered and understood. I owed it to myself and to him to seek the truth, no matter how painful it might be. That evening, I sat down with a notebook, jotting down memories, feelings, and questions. I tried to piece together our story, searching for cracks or clues that might explain his decision. The task felt overwhelming, but I was resolved. I would not let this silence define our relationship. I would find a way to bridge the gap, even if it meant facing uncomfortable truths. I was a mother who had been blindsided by the very person I had raised. But I was also a woman who refused to be invisible, who refused to be cast aside without understanding why. This was the beginning of a painful but necessary journey, one that would force me to confront my deepest fears and, hopefully, lead to healing. For now, all I had was the ache of absence and the question that echoed in my heart: why wasn't I invited to my own son's wedding? In the quiet moments after the initial shock had settled, I found myself drifting back through the years, trying to make sense of the thread that had unraveled between Mark and me. Our relationship had never been perfect, no mother and son's is, but I had always believed there was an unbreakable bond beneath the surface, a connection that would withstand the tests of time and distance. Now, I wasn't so sure. I remembered the early years, how he used to cling to my hand at the playground, the way his laughter would fill the house on lazy Sunday afternoons. We'd share ice cream cones and bedtime stories, secrets whispered under the covers as the night stretched on. Those memories felt like a distant echo, as if they belonged to someone else's life, a time before the widening gap between us took hold. But as Mark grew older, things began to shift. Teen years brought rebellion and silence. I tried to reach him, to understand his world, but he retreated behind closed doors, his moods folding around him like a shield. I told myself it was normal, that all teenagers pushed away their parents in search of independence. Still, I ached for the boy who once needed me so desperately. I thought about the last few years, the sporadic phone calls, the rare visits home that felt rushed and uncomfortable. I could count on one hand the times we had shared a real conversation, the kind where you look into someone's eyes and feel truly seen. More often than not, our interactions were polite but hollow, a series of polite exchanges that never touched the heart. There was one moment in particular that lingered painfully in my mind, the night Mark left for college. I stood at the airport, holding back tears as I hugged him goodbye. He had seemed distant that day, distracted and anxious. When I asked if everything was all right, he brushed me off with a quick smile and a promise to call. But that call was late coming, and when it did, it was brief and surface level. I had chalked it up to adjustment, but now I wondered if that was the beginning of our real distance. I wrestled with the idea that maybe there was something I had missed, some unspoken hurt or disappointment that had taken root in his heart. Had I said or done something that drove a wedge between us? I replayed every argument, every moment of tension, scouring my memory for clues. But the harder I searched, the more elusive the answers became. Then I thought about the wedding, the day I had been shut out. Was this the culmination of years of growing apart, or was there something more immediate, a specific reason that led to this exclusion? I wanted to believe it was a mistake or a misunderstanding, but the absence felt deliberate, a quiet cutting off that spoke volumes. I found myself questioning the nature of our conversations. Had I really listened when he spoke? Or had I been too wrapped up in my own hopes and fears to notice his needs? I remembered times when he had seemed withdrawn, times when he avoided sharing his struggles, times when I had pushed for answers and he had shut down. Maybe he had been protecting himself, building walls that I hadn't seen. The thought stung. I had always seen myself as his protector, his safe harbor in a chaotic world. Yet, somewhere along the way, he had pulled away, leaving me on the shore, watching him drift into the distance. The silence between us was heavy, thick with things left unsaid and feelings unshared. I also thought about his wife, Emily, the woman he married. I had met her only a handful of times, brief encounters filled with polite smiles but little warmth. I had hoped she would be a bridge to my son, someone who could help heal the growing divide. But now, I wondered if her presence had changed things, that perhaps Mark was building a new life that didn't have room for me. The more I reflected, the more I realized how little I truly knew about Mark's life in recent years. His world had become a closed book, pages sealed away from me. I had glimpses through social media and occasional messages, but the intimacy we once shared was gone. The distance wasn't just physical, it was emotional and guarded. In the midst of this reflection, I found myself confronting uncomfortable truths. I had to acknowledge my own shortcomings as a mother, the times I had been too busy, too distracted, too caught up in my own worries to fully be present for him. I had assumed that love alone would be enough to hold us together, but love without understanding and communication wasn't enough. I also recognized the fear that had taken root inside me, the fear that maybe Mark had made a choice to leave me behind, that he no longer wanted me in his life in the way I longed for. That fear was terrifying because it challenged everything I believed about motherhood, about unconditional love and acceptance. Despite the ache, I felt a flicker of hope. The fact that I was still searching, still questioning, meant that I hadn't given up. There was still a chance to reach him, to find a way back through the silence. But it wouldn't be easy. I would have to face the possibility that the path forward required honesty, vulnerability, and perhaps even confrontation. I thought about the conversations we might never have, the moments lost to pride and misunderstanding. I realized that if I wanted to heal this rift, I needed to understand more than just the surface. I needed to know what Mark was feeling, what he was afraid to say. And I needed to be ready to listen without judgment, even if the truth was painful. The emotional weight of all this reflection settled heavily on my shoulders as I went about my days. I found myself staring out the window, lost in thought, wondering if Mark felt the same emptiness I did. Did he miss me, or had he moved on completely? Did he regret his choice, or was he certain that excluding me was the right decision? In the quiet moments, I acknowledged my own loneliness. Being shut out of his wedding was not just about one day, it was a symbol of a much larger fracture. It was the painful realization that the son I loved might be slipping away from me, piece by piece. I knew that to move forward, I needed to confront these feelings head-on. I couldn't let the silence fester any longer. I had to find a way to reconnect, to rebuild trust and understanding. But first, I had to face the truth of where we stood, and that meant accepting that the road ahead might be long and difficult. So, I held on to the memories of our closeness, the hope that they weren't entirely lost. I reminded myself that relationships are never perfect, that they ebb and flow, and that sometimes the deepest wounds can lead to the strongest healing. I was beginning to see that the story between Mark and me was far from over. There were chapters yet to be written, chapters filled with honesty, reckoning, and perhaps, one day, reconciliation. But to get there, I had to be brave enough to face the shadows of the past and the uncertain light of the future. And so, with a heart heavy but determined, I prepared myself to uncover the truth, whatever it might be, and to fight for the relationship I still believed was worth saving. I never expected that digging into the silence between Mark and me would lead to uncovering a secret he'd kept hidden for a decade, a secret that explained so much, yet left me reeling with a mixture of shock and sorrow. It was an accidental discovery, stumbled upon in the quietest moment of my search for understanding, and it changed everything I thought I knew about our fractured relationship. It happened one afternoon as I sat alone in the study, sifting through old letters and photographs I had saved over the years. I was hoping to find something, a clue, a memory, that might bridge the gap between us. Instead, I found an envelope tucked inside an old photo album, yellowed with age and addressed to me in Mark's handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it, the paper crackling softly. The letter inside was dated nearly 10 years ago, from a time I barely remembered. As I read, a story unfolded, one he had never shared, not with me or anyone else. It told of a time when he was a teenager, struggling with a secret burden that weighed heavily on him. He wrote of feeling isolated, misunderstood, and afraid to speak out. The letter revealed the heart of a young boy grappling with something profound and deeply personal. I learned that Mark had been quietly dealing with his identity, wrestling with feelings he didn't yet have the words to explain. He wrote about the fear of rejection, the pain of carrying the secret alone, and the isolation that had grown between us as a result. He described how he had tried to protect me from this truth, fearing my reaction, fearing the loss of the relationship we shared. Reading his words was like stepping into a hidden room in his heart, a place I had never been invited to enter. The vulnerability in his writing broke through years of silence and misunderstanding. I felt the weight of his loneliness, the courage it took to write those words, even if they were never meant to be shared with me at the time. Tears blurred my vision as I realized how deeply he had suffered in silence. I had always thought the distance between us was caused by typical growing pains or misunderstandings, but this was something far more profound. He had been carrying a secret that defined much of his experience and shaped the man he had become. I also found a note tucked inside the letter, a plea for understanding and acceptance. He begged for patience and love, hoping that one day he could share this part of himself openly, without fear. The pain and hope intertwined in his words were palpable, and I felt an overwhelming mix of sorrow and regret that I hadn't known sooner. This revelation shed light on the reasons behind the growing distance between us. I understood now why he had withdrawn, why our conversations had become guarded, and why the wedding invitation never came. He was protecting himself, trying to navigate a path where he felt safe and accepted, even if it meant excluding me. At the same time, I struggled with feelings of betrayal. Why hadn't he trusted me enough to share this with me? Why had he carried this secret alone for so long when I had always thought I was his safe place? The questions churned inside me, tangled with empathy and pain. I knew that the discovery of this letter was a turning point. It was a key to understanding the silence that had grown between us and the invisible walls that had been built. But it was also a reminder of how fragile trust can be, and how long it takes to rebuild what has been broken. I sat back in my chair, the letter crumpled gently in my hands, feeling the weight of years lost and the possibility of a new beginning. The secret that had been hidden for so long was now out in the open, and with it came a chance, however tentative, to heal the wounds that had festered in the dark. In the days that followed, I found myself returning to the letter again and again, reading his words carefully, trying to absorb the depth of his experience. I began to see Mark not just as my son, but as a young man who had faced challenges I could barely imagine. It was humbling and heartbreaking all at once. This discovery forced me to confront my own feelings, my grief over the distance, my frustration at the secrecy, and my yearning to reconnect. I realized that if I wanted to rebuild our relationship, I had to start by accepting this truth fully, with compassion and openness. I also understood that this secret was not mine to reveal. It was Mark's story to share when he was ready. Respecting his privacy became a priority, even as I longed for answers and reconciliation. I knew that any attempt to force the truth from him would only push him further away. Yet, the letter gave me something I hadn't had before: clarity. It explained the silence, the absence, the distance that had felt so inexplicable. It was a painful gift, but a gift nonetheless. It meant that beneath the hurt and confusion lay a root cause, something that could be addressed with honesty and care. I began thinking about how to approach Mark with this new understanding. How could I show him that I accepted him fully, without judgment or fear? How could I create a space where he felt safe to share his truth, whenever he was ready? The discovery also made me keenly aware of how much I needed to learn about him, about the experiences he had endured, and about the ways I could support him going forward. It was clear that our relationship needed to evolve, to become something more honest and authentic than it had been in years. As I grappled with these emotions, I felt a cautious hope stirring within me. Maybe this secret, once a source of pain and distance, could become a bridge, a pathway to understanding and healing. But it would require patience, courage, and a willingness to face difficult conversations. I knew that the road ahead would not be easy. There would be moments of frustration, fear, and perhaps even rejection. But I was ready to take that risk because the alternative, remaining in silence and separation, was unbearable. That night, I placed the letter gently back into the photo album, a sacred piece of our story that I would carry with me as I prepared to reach out to Mark in a new way. I was no longer just the mother who had been excluded from a wedding. I was a woman determined to uncover the truth and rebuild the bond, no matter how fragile it might be. The secret he had kept for 10 years was no longer a barrier between us. It was a key, one that, if used with care and love, could unlock the door to a future where he felt seen, heard, and accepted. And for the first time in a long while, I felt ready to walk through that door. The letter I found was a revelation, a window into Mark's hidden world, but it also left me standing at a crossroads. I knew that confronting him directly about the secret, especially after all these years, could shatter whatever fragile trust might remain between us. I felt unprepared to face that risk, fearing it would push him further away, if only temporarily. Instead, I found myself drawn to Emily, his wife, the woman who had been by his side during the wedding I was excluded from. Emily was a mystery to me, someone I had only met a few times, always at a distance, never truly connected. But now, with the secret I'd uncovered, I wondered if she might be the key to understanding Mark's silence, the bridge to healing the chasm that had grown between us. I wrestled with the decision. Was it right to involve Emily? Would sharing the letter with her betray Mark's trust? Yet, I reasoned that if she truly cared for him, and I believed she did, then she deserved to know the truth. She was now part of his life, and perhaps, by trusting her, I could protect Mark in a way I hadn't been able to before. I decided to reach out cautiously. I sent Emily a message, carefully worded, explaining that I had found something important, something about Mark's past that might help explain the distance between us. I asked if she would be willing to meet and talk, emphasizing that my intention was not to cause pain but to seek understanding and connection. To my surprise, Emily responded quickly, her tone warm but tinged with concern. She agreed to meet at a quiet cafe near her home, a neutral place where we could speak openly without distractions. As the day approached, my heart fluttered with a mix of anxiety and hope. I was stepping into uncharted territory, but I knew it was a necessary step. When we finally sat across from each other, the air between us was thick with unspoken emotions. Emily's eyes were kind but wary, as if she was bracing herself for whatever I was about to share. I reached into my bag and pulled out the letter, hesitating for a moment before placing it gently on the table. "I found this," I said softly. "It's from Mark, a letter he wrote almost 10 years ago. I never knew about this part of his life until now. I wanted you to see it because I think it explains a lot about why he's been distant from me, and maybe from others as well." Emily's fingers trembled slightly as she picked up the letter and began to read. I watched her face closely. There was surprise, sadness, and then a quiet understanding that settled over her features. When she looked up, her eyes met mine with a mixture of gratitude and vulnerability. "Thank you for trusting me with this," she said. "I had no idea. He's never shared this with me either. I knew there were things he was struggling with, but this is so much more than I imagined." We talked for hours, peeling back layers of silence and fear. Emily shared what she knew of Mark's journey, the moments he had confided in her about his identity, the challenges he faced in coming to terms with himself, and the fears that had kept him guarded, even from those closest to him. She spoke of her love for him and her desire to support him, but also her frustration at the walls he had built around himself. I listened, absorbing her perspective and feeling a growing respect for the role she played in his life. It was clear that Emily was more than just a wife, she was a partner, a confidant, and perhaps even a lifeline for Mark in ways I hadn't understood before. As our conversation deepened, I found myself opening up about my own pain, the exclusion from the wedding, the loneliness of being shut out, and the yearning to reconnect with my son. Emily didn't judge or dismiss my feelings. Instead, she acknowledged the complexity of the situation and the difficulty of balancing love and boundaries. We agreed that honesty was essential, but so was patience. Mark's secret had been a heavy burden for him to carry alone, and rushing him to confront it might do more harm than good. Emily suggested that I reach out gently, expressing my acceptance and willingness to listen whenever he was ready, without pressure or expectation. Her words resonated deeply. I realized that healing wouldn't come from demands or ultimatums, but from creating a space where Mark felt safe to share his truth on his own terms. It was a delicate balance, but one I was willing to try to maintain. Before we parted, Emily offered to be a bridge between Mark and me, to help facilitate conversations when the time was right. The gesture was unexpected but comforting. For the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of hope that maybe, through Emily, I could begin to rebuild the connection I so desperately missed. Leaving the cafe that day, I carried with me a mixture of relief and apprehension. Sharing the secret with Emily had been a risk, but it was one that opened a door rather than closing it. I knew there would still be challenges ahead, moments of doubt, fear, and perhaps rejection, but I was no longer alone in this journey. I spent the following days reflecting on our meeting, thinking carefully about how to approach Mark. I began drafting messages, trying to find the right words to express my love and acceptance without overwhelming him. I wanted him to know that I was here, waiting, ready to listen and understand, whenever he chose to reach out. At the same time, I prepared myself emotionally for whatever his response might be. I reminded myself that healing is not linear and that setbacks were possible. But I was determined to move forward with compassion and patience. I also reached out to a close friend, and someone who had supported me through difficult times before. I shared with her what I had discovered and what I was planning. Her advice was steady and reassuring. She reminded me to focus on my own well-being as I navigated this delicate path, to seek support when I needed it, and to celebrate small victories. With Anne's encouragement, I felt more grounded, ready to face the uncertainty ahead. I realized that this journey was not just about reconnecting with Mark, but also about reclaiming my own strength and resilience. The secret I had uncovered was no longer a silent weight on my shoulders, it had become a catalyst for change. By involving Emily, I had taken a step toward transparency and healing, even if the full story was still unfolding. I knew the road ahead would be difficult, filled with moments of doubt and pain. But I also knew that honesty, patience, and love were the foundation on which we could rebuild. And so, with a heart both cautious and hopeful, I prepared to reach out to Mark, not as a mother demanding answers, but as a woman willing to listen, to accept, and to wait. After my meeting with Emily, I knew that stepping forward required more than just courage, it demanded careful thought and preparation. I wanted to reach out to her as a trusted partner in Mark's life, but before doing so, I needed to be sure I was ready to face whatever might come next. This wasn't just about sharing facts or secrets, it was about navigating the fragile emotional terrain between a mother and her son, a territory I hadn't visited in years. I spent the next few days reflecting deeply, trying to untangle my own feelings and intentions. The hurt of exclusion still lingered like a shadow, but now it was tempered by understanding and a growing resolve to be honest, not only with Mark but with myself. I realized that if I wanted to rebuild our relationship, I had to approach it with openness and humility, not just a desire for answers or reconciliation. So, I began planning carefully how to communicate with Emily again, this time with the hope of involving her more directly in the healing process. I wanted to be transparent about my feelings, my regrets, and my hopes, but also to ask for her guidance and support. I wasn't sure how much she knew about the full extent of the distance between Mark and me, or how much she was willing or able to help, but I hoped honesty would be the best path. I wrote a draft message, then rewrote it several times, trying to balance vulnerability with strength. It was hard to find the right words, not too demanding, not too distant, but sincere and open. Finally, I decided to send it, trusting that honesty was worth the risk. Emily responded with kindness and encouragement. She said she appreciated my openness and agreed that moving forward gently was critical. She suggested we meet again, this time with a clearer plan to support Mark and to foster communication between us all. Her willingness to engage felt like a lifeline, a sign that maybe, just maybe, there was hope for mending what had been broken. Before our second meeting, I sought advice from Anne, my closest friend and confidant. I told her everything, the letter, the meeting with Emily, my fears and hopes. Anne listened carefully, then reminded me that healing is rarely straightforward. You have to prepare for all kinds of responses, she said gently. Sometimes people need time, and sometimes they push us away before they come back. Be patient with Mark, and be patient with yourself. Her words settled me. I realized that patience wasn't just about waiting for Mark, it was about giving myself grace through the uncertainty. I wasn't just trying to fix our relationship, I was learning to navigate a new reality, one that required understanding, resilience, and compassion. When Emily and I met again, the atmosphere was more open, less tense. We talked about ways to gently encourage Mark to share his feelings, without pressuring him. Emily suggested that I write a letter to Mark, expressing my love and acceptance, and letting him know I was ready to listen whenever he felt ready to talk. She believed that a letter might give him space to process without the immediacy of a phone call or face-to-face confrontation. I liked the idea. Writing had always been a way for me to connect with my emotions, and I hoped it could reach Mark's heart as well. Emily and I discussed what I might say, how to balance honesty and empathy, how to acknowledge his pain without making assumptions, and how to offer unconditional support. Later that day, I sat down with a pen and blank paper, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and hope. I wrote carefully, telling Mark how much I loved him, how sorry I was for any pain I had caused, and how much I wanted to understand and support him. I told him I had found his letter and that it helped me see things from his perspective. Most importantly, I told him I was here, whenever he was ready to talk, with no pressure or expectations. Writing the letter was cathartic. It allowed me to pour out emotions I hadn't dared voice before. When I finished, I read it over several times, making small adjustments but keeping the essence intact. I wanted Mark to hear my heart, not just my words. After sending the letter through Emily, I waited, feeling the familiar ache of uncertainty. Days passed with no response, and doubt crept in again. Was I too late? Had the distance become too vast? But I reminded myself of Anne's advice: healing takes time, and sometimes silence is part of the process. In the meantime, I focused on my own healing. I reached out to a counselor to help me navigate the complex emotions swirling inside me: grief, hope, fear, and determination. Talking through these feelings gave me strength and clarity. I learned that while I couldn't control Mark's response, I could control how I cared for myself and held space for whatever might come. I also began reading about people who had faced similar challenges with loved ones, stories of estrangement, secrets, and eventual reconciliation. Their journeys were rarely easy, often marked by setbacks and small victories. But the common thread was the power of patience, empathy, and unwavering love. One afternoon, I found myself journaling about my hopes for the future. I imagined a day when Mark and I could sit down and talk openly, without fear or judgment. I pictured laughter, tears, and the rebuilding of trust. The vision felt distant yet real, a beacon guiding me through the uncertainty. Throughout all this, I stayed in touch with Emily, sharing updates and seeking her advice. Her presence was a comforting reminder that I wasn't alone. We planned small ways to support Mark together, always mindful of respecting his boundaries. The weeks stretched on, and while the silence from Mark remained, I noticed subtle shifts in myself. I was learning to hold space for the unknown, to balance hope with acceptance, and to nurture the fragile threads of connection that still existed. I understood now that this journey was not just about reclaiming a relationship but about transformation, of love, of understanding, and of resilience. And though the path ahead remained uncertain, I felt a quiet strength growing within me, a readiness to face whatever came next with an open heart and steady resolve. The day I finally heard from Emily after sending the letter was a mixture of relief and nervous anticipation. Her message was brief but warm: Mark had received the letter and wanted to talk. I felt a surge of hope that quickly mingled with the old fears. What if this conversation reopened wounds too deep to heal? What if he rejected me once again? We agreed to meet at a quiet cafe halfway between our homes, a neutral ground where we could speak without distractions. As I waited for Mark to arrive, my hands trembled slightly, and my heart pounded in my chest. It had been so long since we'd connected like this, and the weight of all the unspoken years pressed heavily on me. When Mark walked through the door, he looked older than the last time I'd seen him, wiser, perhaps, but still carrying that guarded expression I'd come to recognize. Our eyes met, and for a moment, silence enveloped us. Then, he sat down across from me, his hands folded tightly on the table. "I read your letter," he began quietly, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. It meant a lot. More than I thought it would. Hearing those words was like a balm to my aching heart. I wanted to reach across the table, to tell him everything I'd felt during the years of distance, but I held back, letting him set the pace. "I'm sorry," I said softly. "For not understanding, for the times I wasn't there. I never wanted to hurt you." Mark nodded, a shadow passing over his face. "It wasn't easy for me, either. I was scared of losing you, scared of not being accepted for who I am." His honesty broke through the wall I'd built around my own pain. I realized that we had both been carrying fears, different but equally heavy, that kept us apart. "I wish you had told me sooner," I admitted. "I would have done anything to help you feel safe." He looked down for a moment, then back up with a faint smile. "I know. I was just trying to protect myself and everyone else, in my own way." Our conversation flowed gently after that, hesitant at first but growing in warmth and openness. Mark shared fragments of his journey, the struggles with identity, the moments of loneliness, and the relief of finally finding someone like Emily who accepted him fully. I listened, sometimes with tears in my eyes, as he revealed parts of himself I had never seen. It was humbling to witness his vulnerability and courage. We talked about the wedding, the exclusion that had cut so deeply. Mark explained that it wasn't a rejection of me personally but a complicated decision born from fear and uncertainty. He confessed that he hadn't known how to bridge the gap or how to invite me into a part of his life that still felt fragile. "I wasn't ready," he said simply. "And I didn't want to hurt you or cause more pain." His words softened the sting, though the ache remained. I understood that healing would take time and that there were no easy fixes for wounds this old. We also discussed Emily, and I expressed my gratitude that she had been a source of support for him. Mark smiled warmly when he spoke of her, and I felt a small surge of hope that our family could find new ways to connect. As the afternoon wore on, I realized that this conversation was only the beginning. There were many more layers to uncover, many more feelings to navigate. But for the first time in years, I felt a genuine connection rekindling, a fragile thread weaving us back together. Before we parted, Mark reached out and took my hand briefly. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes, a silent promise to try, to heal, to rebuild. Driving home, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and hope. The path ahead was still uncertain, and I knew there would be challenges and setbacks. But that day, we had taken a crucial step toward understanding and reconciliation. I was no longer alone in my yearning for connection. Mark was willing to meet me halfway, to share his truth, and to begin mending the wounds that had kept us apart. That evening, as I sat quietly by the window, I thought about the journey we were embarking on, a journey marked by honesty, patience, and the courage to face our fears. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to walk this path, one step at a time, holding on to the hope that love could bridge even the deepest divides. After our first conversation, I found myself caught in a swirl of emotions, relief, hope, uncertainty, and a lingering ache that refused to fade. The silence that had stretched between Mark and me for so long was no longer empty, it was filled with the weight of words spoken and those still left unvoiced. I felt a fragile sense of relief, but with it came anxiety about what lay ahead. In the days that followed, I found myself reflecting constantly on our meeting. I replayed his words, his expressions, and the moments of sincere connection we shared. But alongside the hope was a gnawing worry: had I truly done enough? Was the path to healing as straightforward as I wanted to believe, or was I clinging to a fragile illusion? The house felt quieter than ever, and the absence of Mark's presence was a constant reminder of the distance we had yet to overcome. I kept the letter he had written years ago close to me, a symbol of the vulnerability he had finally allowed me to glimpse. It was a bittersweet reminder of the years lost in silence. I reached out to Emily a few days later, grateful for the support she had offered. Our conversations were gentle and measured, a shared effort to nurture the fragile bridge between Mark and me. She told me that Mark was processing everything in his own time, that he valued the connection rekindled but was cautious about moving too quickly. Her words reminded me that healing was not linear. There would be setbacks, moments of doubt, and perhaps even silence again. I had to be patient, to accept that rebuilding trust and understanding would take time and gentle care. One evening, I sat alone in the living room, the quiet wrapping around me like a shroud. I felt the weight of years of missed birthdays, whispered frustrations, and unspoken regrets. I asked myself if I had been naive to hope that one conversation could heal the wounds between us. But deep down, I knew that while one conversation was not enough, it was a beginning, a fragile spark in the darkness. I began to write in my journal, pouring out my thoughts and fears. The act of writing became a lifeline, helping me navigate the storm of emotion swirling inside. I wrote about the pain of exclusion, the fear of rejection, and the hope that Mark and I could find our way back to each other. In those pages, I confronted the reality that our relationship might never be the same as it once was. The years of distance had changed us both, and healing would mean accepting a new kind of closeness, one built on honesty, respect, and patience. At times, the loneliness was overwhelming. I missed the son I had raised, the boy who once needed me so desperately. But I also began to see Mark as the man he was becoming, with his own struggles and triumphs. It was a delicate balance, mourning what was lost while embracing what could be. I sought solace in friends, sharing fragments of my journey with those I trusted. Their support was comforting, reminding me that I was not alone in grappling with complex family dynamics. They encouraged me to be gentle with myself, to celebrate small steps forward, and to hold on to hope even when the path seemed uncertain. One afternoon, I received a brief message from Mark. It wasn't a long conversation, just a few words saying he was thinking of me. The message was small, but it carried immense weight. It was a sign that the thread between us, though fragile, was still alive. That simple message gave me strength. It reminded me that healing is often made up of moments like these, small gestures that build into something more significant over time. I resolved to cherish these moments and to be patient as our relationship slowly unfolded. I also began to understand that forgiveness, both for him and for myself, would be essential. Forgiveness for the years of silence, for the mistakes made on both sides, and for the pain that lingered beneath the surface. It was not easy, but it was necessary for moving forward. As the weeks passed, I continued to hold space for Mark, keeping the lines of communication open without pressure. I learned to listen with an open heart, to accept his pace, and to resist the urge to fill the silence with my own fears or expectations. One evening, as I sat by the window watching the sunset, I felt a quiet sense of peace. The journey ahead was still uncertain, and there would be challenges to face. But for the first time in a long while, I believed that love, patient, imperfect, and enduring, could lead us to a new understanding. I knew that the road to reconciliation would be long and winding, filled with moments of joy and sorrow. But I was ready to walk it, step by step, holding on to the fragile hope that had begun to bloom between us. And so, I waited, not with desperation, but with a steady heart, ready to embrace whatever the future held for Mark and me. The moment I saw Mark's name flashing on my phone, my breath caught in my throat. After weeks of fragile exchanges and tentative steps toward rebuilding trust, I felt a mix of hope and trepidation. When I answered, his voice was steady but carried an undercurrent of tension. "Mom, can we talk? I think it's time we clear the air." The invitation was both simple and profound. I could hear the weight in his words, the years of silence, the unspoken pain, the need to confront what had been buried between us. We agreed to meet at a small park, a place neutral and calm, away from the walls that had witnessed so many unresolved conflicts. As I waited on a bench beneath a sprawling oak tree, I felt a storm of emotion swirling within me: anticipation, fear, longing. When Mark arrived, his expression was serious but softened by a hint of vulnerability. We sat side by side, the quiet rustle of leaves our only background noise. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," he began, his voice low. "About why I shut you out, why I kept things from you." I nodded, encouraging him to continue without interrupting. "I know it hurt you, and I'm sorry for that. But I needed to protect myself. I was scared that if I shared too much, I'd lose you completely." His confession was like a key turning in a lock, opening the door to years of hidden pain. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said, eyes meeting mine. "But I felt like I was living in two worlds, one where I could be myself, and another where I had to pretend to be someone else." The honesty in his voice broke through the walls I had built around my own hurt. I realized then that we had both been prisoners of fear, each trying to protect the other in the only way we knew. "I wish I had known," I whispered. "I wish you had trusted me enough to share your truth." He sighed, a mixture of relief and regret washing over his face. "I wanted to, but I didn't know how. And when you weren't there, when I felt judged or misunderstood, I pulled back even more." The conversation unfolded with raw emotion, exposing wounds that had festered in silence for too long. We spoke of misunderstandings, missed opportunities, and the weight of unspoken words. At times, our voices trembled, and tears welled up. But beneath the pain was a shared desire to heal, to rebuild what had been broken. Mark admitted that his choice to exclude me from the wedding was not about rejection but about fear of exposing a part of himself he wasn't ready to share with the world, including me. "I wasn't ready for everyone to see that side of me," he said quietly. "I thought if I kept it private, I could protect both of us." I reached out, taking his hand in mine. "I'm here now. Ready to listen, to accept, to support." He squeezed my hand gently, a silent acknowledgement of the fragile bridge we were building. We talked about the future, about steps we could take to stay connected. Mark expressed a desire for honesty and patience, knowing that healing would be a journey, not a destination. I promised to be patient, to listen without judgment, and to cherish every moment of progress, no matter how small. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the park, I felt a profound sense of hope. The confrontation we had feared was not a breaking point but a beginning, a chance to rewrite our story with truth and compassion. Driving home that evening, I reflected on how far we had come. The path ahead was still uncertain, but we had taken the first brave steps toward understanding and forgiveness. I knew there would be challenges, moments of doubt, fear, and frustration. But I also knew that love, honesty, and courage could guide us through the darkest valleys. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt a quiet peace settle over me. The conversation with Mark had opened a door, and though the journey was far from over, I was ready to walk through it, hand in hand with my son. In the days that followed our conversation in the park, a tentative hope began to take root. The air between Mark and me felt less heavy, as if we had exhaled together after holding our breath for far too long. But healing is rarely a smooth path, and I knew that the real work had just begun. We started with small steps, text checking in, brief calls sharing everyday moments, and occasional visits where silence was comfortable rather than strained. Each interaction was a fragile thread weaving us closer, a delicate dance of rebuilding trust and understanding. Emily continued to be a quiet anchor in this process. She reached out with gentle encouragement, offering insights into Mark's feelings and reminding me to be patient. Her presence was a balm, easing the tension that still lingered beneath the surface. Yet, despite the progress, there were moments when old wounds resurfaced. A missed call, a delayed reply, or an unspoken expectation could trigger a wave of doubt and frustration. I found myself questioning whether the distance we'd endured had left scars too deep to fully heal. One afternoon, Mark and I sat together over coffee, and the conversation turned to the past, those years of silence that had separated us. He spoke candidly about his pain, his fear of rejection, and the loneliness that had accompanied his secret. "I know I hurt you," he said softly. "And I hate that I made you feel invisible." His words stirred a mix of sorrow and empathy within me. I realized that this journey was not just about mending my own heart but about acknowledging his struggles and the courage it took for him to finally open up. "I forgive you," I told him quietly. "And I hope you can forgive me too, for the times I wasn't there or didn't understand." He nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "I do. It's going to take time, but I want us to keep moving forward." Together, we began to talk about boundaries and expectations, to navigate the delicate balance between closeness and respect for his autonomy. Mark expressed a need for space at times, a reminder that healing doesn't mean erasing individuality. I listened, learning to hold my own desires lightly, to prioritize his comfort without sacrificing my hope for connection. It was a lesson in humility and unconditional love. As weeks turned into months, our relationship deepened in unexpected ways. We shared stories from our lives, laughed over old memories, and even planned a small family gathering, a tentative step toward rebuilding the bonds that had frayed. Emily's role as a mediator grew more significant. She helped facilitate conversations when tensions arose, smoothing over misunderstandings with kindness and patience. Her presence reminded me that healing often requires more than just two people, it needs a community of support. There were setbacks, moments when the past cast long shadows. But each time, we chose to return, to listen, to apologize, to try again. The process was messy and imperfect, but it was real. Through it all, I learned to cherish the small victories, the shared meal, the heartfelt apology, the unexpected hug. These moments became the foundation of a new relationship, one built not on idealized memories but on honest, sometimes painful, understanding. I also found strength in forgiving myself. I acknowledged my mistakes and shortcomings as a mother, accepting that love alone is not always enough and that growth requires courage and vulnerability. One evening, as I sat quietly reflecting, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Despite the pain and distance, Mark and I were finding our way back to each other. Our story was still unfolding, marked by resilience and hope. I knew there would be challenges ahead, times when old fears and misunderstandings might resurface. But I was committed to walking this path, embracing the uncertainties with an open heart. The journey toward reconciliation was not a destination but a continual process, one that required patience, empathy, and unwavering love. And as I looked forward, I held on to the belief that, together, we could create a new chapter, one grounded in honesty, respect, and the healing power of connection. Months of tentative steps and heartfelt conversations had brought Mark and me to a fragile new understanding, a relationship no longer defined by silence and distance but by honesty and cautious hope. The path we traveled was far from perfect, but each moment of connection felt like a victory, a thread woven into a tapestry of healing. I found myself embracing this new chapter with a mixture of gratitude and determination. The past, with its pain and misunderstandings, could not be erased, but it no longer needed to dictate our future. Instead, we were crafting something different, something real and enduring. One afternoon, Mark invited me to join him and Emily for dinner at their home. The invitation felt like a milestone, a sign that our relationship was moving beyond mere words into shared life. I arrived with a heart full of anticipation and a touch of nervousness, unsure of what to expect. Emily greeted me warmly, a reassuring presence that immediately eased my anxiety. The house was cozy, filled with the soft hum of laughter and the aroma of home-cooked food. Mark appeared in the doorway, his smile genuine and open, a contrast to the guarded man I had known for so long. As we sat around the table, sharing stories and savoring the meal, I felt a sense of belonging that had been missing for years. The conversation flowed naturally, punctuated by moments of laughter and thoughtful reflection. It was as if, in this space, the wounds of the past could breathe and begin to heal. After dinner, Mark and I found a quiet corner to talk. He thanked me for my patience and acceptance, acknowledging the journey we had undertaken together. I told him how proud I was of his courage and how grateful I was for the chance to reconnect. Our conversation turned to the future, the hopes and dreams we still carried, both individually and as a family. We spoke of continuing to build trust, of being honest even when it was difficult, and of supporting one another's growth. I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me, a recognition that while the past could not be changed, the future was ours to shape. The love between us, though tested and strained, had endured. In the weeks that followed, I continued to nurture this new relationship with care and respect. I learned to listen deeply, to celebrate progress without rushing, and to accept that healing is an ongoing, evolving process. Emily remained a steady ally, her kindness and understanding bridging gaps and fostering connection. Together, the three of us began to create a family dynamic rooted in empathy and mutual support. I also embraced my own journey of self-discovery and growth, recognizing that reclaiming my identity as a mother and a woman meant embracing both the joys and the challenges of this new chapter. Looking back, I understood that the pain of exclusion and silence had been a catalyst for transformation, not just between Mark and me, but within myself. I had learned the power of vulnerability, the necessity of patience, and the resilience of love. And as I looked toward the future, I felt ready to face whatever lay ahead, knowing that no matter the uncertainties, the bonds we rebuilt were strong enough to carry us forward. This was not a story of perfect resolution, but of imperfect healing, a journey marked by courage, honesty, and the enduring hope that family, at its best, is a place of acceptance and renewal. With each day, I embraced the new understanding between us, grateful for the chance to rewrite our story and to move forward together, hand in hand, into whatever the future might hold.